Okay, now I think we're ready for our main talk. So today's main talk presenter is Mike Aus. I don't think he needs much of an introduction, though just to embarrass him, I could. No? Yes, sir. The topic of the main talk is all you need is empathy.
Thank you, Verena, and thank you, Leslie, for being here. Always a joy. Okay, so I go to a gym. Doesn't look like it, but I do. And you know when you go to work out at a gym, you see people every day that you don't ever talk to, but they kind of seem strangely familiar just because you see them every day. But yeah, people just go and plug into their MP3 players and get on the machines and do their thing. But there's like this familiar crowd, and so in my boredom on the treadmill, I'll sometimes kind of look around at my friends who I don't know, and I'll just kind of like make up stories for them, you ever do that? Just kind of make up a bio, like, okay, well, they look like, and, try, what do they do for a living? And, like you oil and gas guys kind of look the same, and accountants kind of look the same, and seriously, people, they're like, or it's a profession look. Anyway, so, look and do that. So there's one guy who comes, a young man, and he's all tatted up, and he's always wearing a ski cap, and he's always kind of scowling, and it looks to me like he's trying to project some kind of like badass, intimidating persona, and maybe he's like a heavy metal rocker. That's my story for him. I don't know, but I just never get a good vibe from this guy. And I decided he must be some kind of jerk, or he's like has a lot of insecurity, so he's hiding behind the armor of his tattoos and his anger or something like that. And so the other day, I get to the gym in the morning at the exact same time as Mr. Heavy Metal Scowling Rocker, and we get to the door at the same time, and he grabs the door first. He gives me this warm, genuine smile. He says, "Good morning, how are you doing today?" And then he says, "After you." And now I feel like the big jerk because, like, my life story for him was all wrong. I mean, he seems like a really nice guy. And maybe there's a good reason he's scowling all the time, because the only time I ever see him is when he's working out. And frankly, everybody looks miserable when they're working out, right? And so it was a reminder to me that maybe I needed a little work, a little more intentionally on my empathy skills. But apparently I'm not alone, because Nicholas Kristof, who is a columnist for the New York Times, some of you may have read a column he wrote not too long ago about a friend of his, I believe his name was Kevin, who had gone through like just a bunch of horrible things. That he had lost his job, he injured his back, he lost his health insurance, and he died way too young at the age of 54. And if I remember correctly, I might be wrong on this, but I think he died of cancer that was a very treatable form of cancer, but he delayed going to see a doctor until it was too late. Very sad story. And Nicholas Kristof wrote this column as kind of a plea for more empathy in our society for people going through tough times. And then just very recently, Kristof wrote a follow-up column writing about the responses that people sent him. And he said the responses were overwhelmingly negative and scolding. Kevin's problems were of his own making. He should have taken responsibility, personal accountability. What happened in his life was his fault, yada, yada, yada. And so Kristof's plea for empathy ended up generating a barrage of letters that were anything but empathetic. And the scary thing for me is this was the New York Times. That's supposed to be the bleeding liberals reading the New York Times. And they were scolding and shaming and judgmental. And Nicholas Kristof seems to be onto something. There does appear to be kind of this demonstrable empathy deficit going on in our country right now. A pretty well-noted study by the University of Michigan recently shows that the empathy levels among young Americans have been in steady decline from the 1980s until today. And the biggest decline has taken place in the last 10 years. Some researchers are saying part of it has to do with people spending more time alone and less time involved in communal activities. Others are pointing to the amount of time that people spend on social media, sending very short messages back and forth all the time, but spending less time in substantive, meaningful conversation with real human beings. The jury is out, I think, but there's this kind of consensus that there's been this decline in empathy in our culture. And then there's this whole strain of thought that's been very influential in the Western world, going from Thomas Hobbes to people like Ayn Rand and Paul Ryan, that sees human nature as essentially driven by self-interest, by greed, by selfishness. But the thing about the people who see human nature as being primarily driven by self-interest, the thing is they're flat out wrong. Because while at the same time we've been experiencing this kind of empathy deficit in the culture, there's also kind of been an empathy revolution going on in the world of research. Neurologists have identified an empathy circuit in the brain. Evolutionary biologists have shown us that evolution created Homo sapiens as a social creature that evolved to be both cooperative and empathetic. Child psychologists have found out that infants as young as 3 months already demonstrate like huge tendencies towards empathy that could not have been taught to them. It's just innate. So very exciting stuff there. Now, before we go any further, I do want to define empathy. At least, and I think there's a lot of different, this isn't like the definition, but just kind of a working definition for today. And this one comes from the author of a book about empathy, and I can't pronounce his name, so I'm not even going to try. But I thought this was a good working definition. Empathy is the art of stepping imaginatively into the shoes of another person, understanding their feeling and perspectives, and using that understanding to guide your actions. So stepping into the shoes of another person, trying to understand their feelings, their perspectives, and then using that understanding to guide your actions. I thought that's a pretty good definition of empathy. So you see, empathy is very different from sympathy. Sympathy is just feeling sorry for somebody, but you can feel sorry for somebody without making that mental leap of attempting to step into their shoes, see life from their perspective. And then also empathy is very different from the golden rule. Golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And what's interesting is that the golden rule kind of got enshrined in the world's religions all around the same time, from Buddhism to Judaism. And this was George Bernard Shaw's response to the golden rule. The British playwright. Do not do unto others as you would have them do unto you. They might have different tastes. Right? Yeah. He's right on point. The golden rule is based on a golden rule based on empathy would say, do unto others as they would have you do unto them, because the golden rule kind of assumes that our perspectives and values are going to align, and that's not necessarily true. So empathy is not the golden rule, and so I'm making a case that we need to go beyond the golden rule. And it is also not love. It might include love. It's a good idea to be empathetic to the people you love. That's a good thing. But I think empathy is distinct from love. And here's why I personally find the concept of empathy so powerful and appealing. Because if you grew up in religion, at least in one of the Judeo-Christian traditions, and you went to church or Sunday school or synagogue, and they usually taught you something along the lines of love your neighbor as yourself, right? Leviticus 19:18 gets picked up in the New Testament. And so you're supposed to go around loving everybody just as Jesus did, allegedly. But there's a problem with that, and love your neighbor as yourself. That sounds great, and this is why I called it "All You Need Is Empathy," because the Beatles did that song, "All You Need Is Love," and I think they were doing that tongue in cheek, don't you? I don't think, it was not this simplistic oh, love is the answer to the world's problems. And sometimes you kind of get that. And I think the problem with that, making love your neighbor as a goal, and why it's potentially so oppressive and ultimately not helpful, is you simply can't love everybody. All of us have a limited capacity for love. You can love your friends, your family, your significant others, stuff like that. But beyond that, I own a Subaru. They make a good car, a safe, reliable, sturdy car. Big fan of Subarus. I hate their current advertising campaign, which goes, you've probably seen it on television. Love. It's what makes a Subaru a Subaru. What in the heck is that supposed to mean? There's nobody down at the Subaru home office that loves me. They might be conscientious, they might be concerned about me as a customer, genuinely. They might conscientiously design safe cars. But love has nothing to do with it. The slogan is blatant emotional manipulation. We throw the word love around so much it becomes meaningless. And if I'm supposed to love everybody, which is what my former religion told me I had to do, love my neighbor as myself, there are a lot of unlovable jerks out there too. And I'm sure I'm an unlovable jerk to many people. But it's an impossible goal that nobody can live up to. But empathy, that's a different story. I can make a stab at empathy. Loving your neighbor, and loving your enemy, love your enemy as yours. No, that's hard. But I can learn to empathize. You can learn to empathize with your enemy, putting yourself in their shoes, looking at things from their perspective, trying to understand their motivations, and in the process that humanizes them, and that could make all the difference. And that's why I think empathy could ultimately be a greater tool for social change, for relationship change, than the old concept of love could ever be. And I'm not saying I don't believe in love, don't get me wrong, okay? But I'm saying it's a distinct thing. And the empathy revolution could be a game changer. And then the good news is that empathy is something we can all work on. This is the really cool news coming from neurologists and psychologists today, saying that partly because of the new thoughts about our neuroplasticity, the ability of our brain to grow as we continue to go through life, they're saying we aren't born with a fixed empathy quota. I mean, yeah, naturally some people are maybe naturally more empathetic than others, but it's something all of us can increase. They say it's something like musical skills. It's a combination of nurture and nature. And there are things we can actively do to increase our empathy. And actually, there's a whole bunch of them. So I'm only going to talk about 3 today. But there's actually, if you look it up, there are a lot of exercises and things you can involve in a daily life that, to work on your empathy. So here's just a few. Number 1, join with others in a cooperative venture. That's like one of the number 1 things. Getting out, yeah, done. Apparently, I found this. Apparently, groups, and we have several people from the UK out here, so I'll stand corrected. But I read recently there's been like this resurgence of communal singing, especially choir singing, in the United Kingdom, and a lot of it has to do with a BBC television show called The Choir. It's a reality show, and there's this young, charismatic, gifted choral director named Gareth Malone, and he goes around the UK and he assembles just strange groups of disparate people and brings them, like a lot of times total strangers, and he brings them together and trains them as a choir to prepare for major performances. And the choirs he puts together are from people of all walks of life, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different religions. But the thing is bringing them all together into a common goal. And so people are meeting people they would never meet in their normal spheres of life. He talked about putting together a choir from this like huge hospital where they had hospital orderlies singing right next to heart surgeons, and how these people would probably never talk to each other in the hospital. But people are, and what it's doing is it's breaking down barriers, it's building understanding, and the show is not so much really about the singing as it is about building community. And apparently it's been a huge hit in the UK, and it's having this ripple effect and it's really resonating with people. So, as Catherine said, join with others in a cooperative venture. If you're here today, you did that. So I guess that was redundant. Okay, next. No, the point is keep doing it. Keep coming back. Okay. Next, practice the art of conversation. I don't think we often think of conversation as an art. We take it for granted, but real substantive conversation is an art. Numerous studies have shown that couples in the United States and in the UK spend way more time watching television every day than speaking to each other directly. There was the University of Arizona study suggests that people with high levels of life satisfaction, or rank high on the happiness scale, have twice as many substantive conversations as those who measure low on the happiness scale. And the reason conversation is so important for developing empathy is it's one of the ways we step out ourselves and try to understand the inner emotions and feelings of another human being. And I think this is one reason why the meeting of minds concept that Verena launched here at Oasis has resonated so much with our community. I attended the last one. There were almost 40 people over at Lou's Place. And the topic that evening had something to do with, is like religious belief or non-belief an issue in romantic relationships. It was a fascinating topic. But what amazed me even more as I sat there and looked out across the room was just the sheer diversity of the people there. We had people from all different walks of life, all different life backgrounds. We had age diversity. We had people in their young 20s and people in their 70s. And I was sitting there and I couldn't think of any other venue in life where you would achieve such diversity of people across the life spectrum, where we would sit and listen and learn from each other. I think it's a powerful idea. I hope it continues to thrive. In fact, we'll probably have to split it up because it's going to get too big. But let's have more meeting of minds. That's part of building empathy. Next, solid research is also showing that exposure to literature, music, film, and art can be a catalyst for empathic behavior. Harvard professor Steven Pinker wrote recently The Better Angels of Our Nature, which kind of charts the steady decline of violence and cruelty in the human race and the increase of empathy over the centuries. And if you went back to the 1700s, violence and cruelty was a part of daily life at a level unimaginable to us today. Torture was a regular and accepted part of the justice system. If you got arrested in 1700, you're going to be tortured. And everybody's like, yeah, torturing animals was considered fun entertainment. There was slavery. I mean, you name it. And then something happened in the 1800s, at least kind of in Western civilization, where all of a sudden people started, let's have an abolition movement and get rid of slavery. And let's maybe not make tiny little children work in factories and stuff. And there was this kind of a sudden uptick in empathy in the 1800s. And Steven Pinker's one of his ideas about this is he attributes parts of this to what he calls the reading revolution. Because in the 1800s, all of a sudden, people started reading more and more widely and had more access to empathic literature than ever before in human history. So that was the time, mid-1800s, when crowds of Americans would stand on the docks of New York waiting for ships to come over from England carrying the next installments of Charles Dickens' latest novel. It's kind of like me waiting for Better Call Saul on Monday night, or it's like, I can't wait. But, they would do that. They stood there. It's like, what's going to happen to little Nell, And, but it caused empathy to increase. Harriet Beecher Stowe, in 1848, lost a child to a cholera epidemic in Cincinnati. And she writes later that it was a turning point for her. And let me quote her here. She says, "It was at his dying bed, at his grave, that I learned what a poor slave mother may feel when her child is torn away from her. The death of her son, some way," I mean, she'd always been kind of like anti-slavery, but it was like it was something about the experience of losing her son to cholera clicked for her to allow her to step into the shoes of a slave mother to understand what it was like. Oh, this must be what it's like to have your kid torn from your arms. And then she goes on to write Uncle Tom's Cabin, which went on to sell, published in 1852. By 1860, it had sold more than 4 million copies. Extrapolate that to the size of the United States today, it would be equivalent to sales of 40 million copies. Way more than 50 Shades of Grey, which says something about us. Okay. When she met Abraham Lincoln for the first time in 1862, Lincoln greeted her with these words, "So you are the little lady who wrote the book that started this great war." And Lincoln was not exaggerating. Literature, art, film, music can have that kind of impact on empathic sensibilities. So that's exactly why the United States government, during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, heavily censored the photos of flag-draped coffins coming home, heavily censored the pictures of civilian men, women, and children who had been killed by American attacks, because they knew that that would have an empathic effect on weakening support for the war. So don't show people this. The American media and the public largely stood by and let it happen. Finally, I think the empathy revolution has implications for the free thought movement. A few years ago, I attended a national convention of a well-known group. On the one hand, it was thrilling and freeing to be with people who shared my newfound secular perspective, but one part of the experience really bothered me because the convention was permeated with this kind of unrelenting hostility towards and ridicule of religion. At evening get-togethers, people dressed up like priests and monks and the Pope and nuns and demons and angels and all kinds of other stuff. And it kind of left a bad taste in my mouth because many of the people I know and love are still religious. And I would not want to hurt them for anything or ridicule their deeply held beliefs. Look, I am as non-theistic as anybody out there. And like probably most of the people in this room, I wanted to live in a secular society. And it is high time that we are freed from the garbage and oppression and other issues that religion has brought to the table. But let me ask you this. If you want to win people to your side, do you do it by mocking and ridiculing the other side? Of course not. You can't win people to the secular agenda by mocking their religion. If you think that, you're an idiot. Oops. There goes my empathy again. See, I got a lot of work to do. A lot of work. Let's say you're selling Pepsi and you're trying to win over Coke drinkers. Do you win over Coke drinkers to Pepsi by ridiculing the Coke drinkers? No. The only way to get people to buy your product is to make a better product. Make your product more appealing. And I think that's the opportunity that lies before us right now in the secular community movement. The way we're going to make America into a secular society is to create a better secular alternative that is so compelling people won't be able to stay away. And that's what we can do. We can offer a better community, better conversation, better music, better reason, better thinking, and yes, even better empathy. When the launch team that formed Houston Oasis settled on the word oasis for what we're doing, we liked it for a variety of reasons. For us, it represented, an oasis of free thought in a world that's often filled with dogma, an oasis of reason in an often unreasonable world. Oasis is a place of respite and refreshment, a stopping place on the journey of life. It works beautifully on a lot of different levels. And now I think we can add something else to the list. In a world that is so often an empathic desert, could we not also strive to be known as an oasis of empathy? I think it'd be worth a shot. Thank you. And yeah, a few thoughts and comments, and also let me say this is a huge topic, and we barely scratch the surface. Someday I'll do a follow-up talk because I have enough material on things here that I wanted to follow up on. So this is not an all-exhaustive thing. David. Yeah.
I'm wondering when we're going to start, or somebody's going to start the Oasis Choir.
The Oasis Choir. There's been some talk about that from time to time. So get with TC. She's back in the children's room today.
Oasis Jam.
Yeah, Oasis Jam. I like that. Yeah, absolutely. I've heard talk of an Oasis literary journal. That would be very cool. Okay, Susan, and then Johnny, and then Jesse. Yeah.
Every time I hear the phrase, putting on somebody else's shoes, I never hear, and then taking them off again. And so I get this image of somebody going around. Anyway.
Wearing a lot of shoes. Yeah.
It's like that idea of trying on somebody's shoes or trying on somebody's glasses.
Yeah.
And then, okay, now what does that feel like? And then putting them back and then trying on somebody else's.
Yeah, like we even do that sometimes, like literally with our glasses. Like you're sitting around with friends at a bar, and like, hey, let me try your glasses on. It's like, oh, you're blind, yeah. Okay. It's like, Johnny, yeah.
Mike, you mentioned in your talk that in the last 10 years, empathy's kind of been in a decline.
Yeah.
It kind of sounds like a concern. What do you attribute that to, and what can we do in our own lives to maybe counteract that?
Well, I think the counteract goes to some of the things that I spoke to. I gave 3 strategies for increasing empathy in our lives and in our world, which was, joining a community, joining on a communal venture, like we're doing here, being part of a community, because some of it is attributed to people spending more time alone and not being connected to community, spending time in intentional conversation, practicing the art of substantive conversation. Some empathy experts are suggesting make a goal for yourself to try to speak to like one new stranger a week. There's then I talked about art, the power of empathic art, literature, film, and so we can be a venue for that here. I think, and then there's actually a whole lot of other ideas. This is a conversation we could continue in the Facebook group if people have ideas for increasing empathy, because really there's like this huge list of things that you could try. One of the things I didn't get a chance to talk about today is the demonstrable effect of travel. Getting back to what Wayne was talking about, travel seems to have a huge role in empathy, especially, and here's the deal: I've taken a lot of, like all of you, I've had nice vacations to nice places, and I found that after a while, at least in my memory, the nice vacations to the nice places kind of all start to run together. But the vacations that still stand out for me is when I went to a very kind of, for me, outside my comfort zone part of the world and engaged in some kind of a service project or educational event. And those are the ones that, I remember going to, with Habitat for Humanity, going to build adobe houses in New Mexico, which is I remember that far more vividly than like a lot of the beach vacations. So that's something I'd like to see us work on in the future as we continue to grow as a community. Oasis experiential field trips. And I think I would like to see us eventually have, once we get our own kind of permanent facility, we can be a catalyst and a supporter of international service projects, just like churches have done, only we'd be doing it in a secular perspective. I think Jesse was, and then maybe Pat. Jesse, did you?
Yeah, I read an article this week about the fact that there's a lot of love for nonfiction, not a lot of love for fiction these days among a lot of people.
That's a good point.
And
yeah, nonfiction does not increase empathy.
Right.
Fiction does.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I actually fall into this because it's like, well, what's the point of fiction? Well, this article powerfully argued that empathy is the point of fiction. And Harry Potter readers, some of you might see this, kids that read Harry Potter tested higher for empathy. So
Yeah, like for example, in a sense, reading literature is a vicarious experience of, you could sit down and read about the conditions of life in 19th century England in some kind of a textbook, or you could read, Oliver Twist or David Copperfield. Which one is going to get you back in? Well, I mean, Dickens was right there writing it, so you feel like you're walking it. So yeah, there is this other, aspect to fiction that is so crucial, partly because our brain's being wired for narrative. Pat?
Just kind of tie the literature and travel both together. One of my favorite quotes, I pulled it up so I could get it right. Mark Twain was that travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness.
Oh yeah, okay. Let me repeat that from the mic. A Mark Twain quote: "Travel is fatal to bigotry, prejudice, and narrow-mindedness." Absolutely. So good, Aaron.
I was going to say that the layers of interpretation of love experience and written about by Walt Whitman, for example, expanded my own understanding of the topic in a way that, a nonfiction study of psychology experiments would not have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
I was just going to add to the art of conversation, and I think something that a lot of people miss is that if you are more open about your own life and about, like, if you ask questions like, oh, what do you do? That's nice. Like, that's the kind of responses you're going to get. And if you actually, if someone's like, how are you doing? You're like, actually, not so well because, so-and-so is happening. That's more likely to elicit an actual response from somebody because you actually gave them something about yourself. And
yes.
Then people are more likely to give something back. And that's probably how to make better conversation, in my opinion.
Yeah, probably a topic for a whole nother talk would just be the art of conversation. I think there's a lot there we could unpack. We probably need, Dennis, go ahead, one more. Yeah.
I'm speaking here next week about art, and when I'm done, we'll all be in Pat.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Have you done any studies the link between empathy and autism? Because I think it brings about a whole new perspective on the empathy, because we're starting to understand that communication isn't the key to empathy, because there's these autistic people that can't communicate, but they can connect, they can be empathetic.
Yeah. That's very good.
Talked about conversation or fiction. I don't relate to that at all because I'm high functioning autistic. But when somebody comes up to me and has a conversation with me and just gets direct to the point and asks me something deep, I can connect, but I can't connect through trivial conversation.
Sure. Yeah, and I like to make, when I talked about conversation, I didn't spend enough time on actually any of those things. They make a huge distinction between substantive conversation and a trivial conversation. So having trivial conversations with people about the weather or sports or whatever does in fact not contribute to empathy, but is that the substantive congregations about big life issues. So thanks for bringing it up, and that's probably a whole other talk right there. Okay, we got to wrap it up, guys. I'm going to turn, and if you have any other, come grab me later if you'd like to keep chatting about it. Johnny.